This video is meant to cover everything the dev team conveyed during their May 16th Play MA stream. This stream happened one day after the artist Antireal came forward with evidence that the Marathon Alpha contained imagery that was directly taken from works they had previously posted online. I've condensed the information within the stream into small sections. Utilize the timestamps I reference inside this video if you want to hear exactly what Bungie said in their stream. A link to Bungie's stream will be in the description, as well as some links to Antireal's socials. If you want to hear my personal opinion on the stream, then skip to the conclusion of this video. At the 2-minute mark, Joe Ziegler opens by stating that there won't be any gameplay, and that it'll just be a discussion, before stating that Joseph Cross has something that he wants to talk about, which is where the Antireal plagiarism controversy is discussed. Relevant to note here is that the game director, Joe Ziegler, never speaks on this topic directly. As a primary leader for this game, it seems crazy to me that he wouldn't even acknowledge a level of responsibility for this situation, or at the very least ensuring that doesn't happen again. Joe Cross states that in the early stages of pre-production, an employee took icons and text elements from Antireal and placed them into a decal sheet. These elements ultimately ended up within the texture files of the game. In response to this, Bungie is reaching out to Antireal to resolve the issue with them, auditing all of their assets, removing anything that is stolen or questionably sourced, and reviewing their internal review process to prevent further incidents. Joseph Cross personally apologizes to Antireal, and then they move on to talking points about the alpha. At 6:45, the first gameplay element they discuss is the survival aspect to the game. Generally, they are changing the amount of heals and ammo within the match and tuning the balance around environments and enemies to make the survival challenge of the game more engaging. Also, they are reworking how the AI enemies engage with you to make stealth more viable and to make the enemies respond more appropriately to player action. At 15:33, Joseph Cross talks for a bit about the increases in overall visual fidelity that will be coming with exterior spaces, lighting, and generally increasing immersion via these presentations. Soon, next time, next week are all referenced in passing by Joe Ziegler and Joseph Cross at a few points throughout the stream with no direct date or time given for when they'll be showing stuff next. At 19:30, Joe Ziegler discusses the crew play component of the game and states that many players were not pleased with the crew fill during the alpha. Now, in the survival elements discussion earlier, Andrew Witt stated in passing that those changes may affect the viability of solo play, but this section, specifically talking about crew play, does not address solos in any meaningful way. They basically plan on tuning the time to kill, health pool, and skill demand of the weapons to increase the viability of a low-geared team against a team with better shields and items. They want to make it feel like there is always a path to victory via skill. Another change to improve crew play will be increasing the accuracy and options within the ping system. They understand that changes are needed to improve the viability of the random crew play, but they don't say that they are changing anything specifically about how the game is structured around this crew play feature. At 28 minutes and 20 seconds, they take a question from the chat about if they would hire Antireal and pay to continue using her assets. Joseph Cross states that they would be open to working with her, but reiterates that the majority of the assets within the game were developed by Bungie. Joe Ziegler restates that Bungie is currently scrubbing all of the assets to make sure nothing else, quote, slipped through the cracks. At 31 minutes, Joseph Cross talks about the larger influences on the artistic stylings of Marathon. A few things referenced here are Swiss modernism, Y2K aesthetic, Designers Republic, Wipeout, and minimalism. At 33 minutes and 30 seconds, Joe Ziegler discusses the possibility of adding other crew-size modes into the game. They're not committing to these modes, but are considering how they can implement them. They're also working on how to enable communication with enemy teams, but do not reference proximity chat specifically. Around 35 minutes, they talk about how they are changing the pacing of the progression system by altering how long the various aspects of it take and making the factions feel more distinct. No clear description on how they are doing this. Vague references to currency and black market rebalancing are also here. At 38 minutes, they take another question from the chat about what the biggest feedback from the alpha that they want to change by release is. They loop back around to the survival stuff from the beginning of the stream. They feel like the game is currently just about surviving other players, and they want it to be about surviving in spite of other players and the colony and the Marathon ship itself. One specific thing they touch on is changing how reviving fully dead teammates works. They want to make it so that an enemy team cannot fully res in the time it takes you to heal to full health. At 41 minutes and 30 seconds, they take a question from Curiosity, who, if you've ever been in the Twitch chat, you'll recognize. Curiosity asks, will we see more ways to customize, visualize, and represent ourselves as players within the runner? Joe Ziegler references skins, says that they aren't going to talk too much on that, and that they are still thinking about how to give players visual options. Andrew Witz continues on from this to talk about build crafting and increasing the overall viability of that system. Joseph Cross closes this section by stating that he is excited about cosmetics in the fashion game, no specifics given. At 44 minutes, 45 seconds, another question is asked about proximity chat. They don't have a solution currently. Previous to this, Joe Ziegler has stated that this was a compliancy issue. At approximately 46 minutes, they talk about materials, no specifics given, generally rebalancing, tuning, and restructuring to ensure that players feel rewarded by finding valuable items and understand their use. This leads into a discussion around bag space, where they state that they want to make the bag space feel appropriate while retaining the value of finding a bag. No further specifics on that. At 49 minutes, 44 seconds, they get this question from chat, quote, is there plans to add guaranteed ways to build craft? I heard lots about build crafting, but not being able to get a loadout I designed without hopefully randomly stumbling upon it sounds bad. I would like to see crafting systems, or at least have the option to change cores with some material expenses. Joe Ziegler and Andrew Witz agree with the chatter and state that they are working on a way to make the lower tier builds more accessible via bartering or purchasing on the black market so players can have access to a build they identify with more regularly. At 51 minutes 30 seconds, they get a question about reworking the res system. Andrew Witz states that the team concurs, resing feels too free, and they want fully killed enemies to be very difficult to bring back during fights. At 55 minutes 30 seconds, someone asks where the aliens are. The team continues to say that they're coming. This is the starting point of the journey, and then there's a long pause. At 58 minutes 30 seconds, the last question asked was about increasing the verticality of the maps. Joe Ziegler states that the team is thinking about the maps as constantly evolving spaces that will change during the course of the seasons. The stream ends at the hour mark with Joe Ziegler thanking everyone for playing the alpha and asking questions. Like I said earlier, if you want to hear exactly what they said, you can refer to the timestamps that I have inside this video and check out Bungie's official stream in the link in the description below. To conclude this video, I'm going to give you my thoughts generally on the stream and Bungie's response to the Antireal situation. The stream was riddled with technical issues that made Bungie appear wildly unprepared. The delivery was stiff and uncomfortable. The format made it difficult for viewers to parse out what exactly was being said, and it would have been better probably if they just made a video with bullet points directly outlining their talking points, especially since they were unable to show any new gameplay or content. Of the 9 things I propose they should change from the alpha in that video that I made last week, I believe they touched on 4 of them, those being the pings, loot reworks, map variety, and time to kill. The way I see it, the 3 biggest pieces of feedback were that people wanted solo play, more customization of their character, and additional modes or a PvE-only experience. The only references to solo play were vague and tied to time to kill, weapon, and resource balancing. Customization seems to be something that they are still figuring out, and we got a reference to skins. Zero discussion was put forth around the game mode and how the narrative will be delivered. I don't feel that the solo play is necessary. I'm fine with skins, and I'm not calling for a PvE component to this game. But it seems pretty wild to me that chunks of time were not carved out to address these issues, since they seem to be overwhelmingly referenced in feedback about the game. The team here are incredibly talented developers, but they feel like ineffectual communicators, and I believe they would benefit as a whole from more direction and scripting when it came to this style of presentation. Joseph Cross's apology to Antireal felt sincere, but it felt clear that there was a level of legal jargon injected into their articulation of the topic as a whole. Continuous reiteration of the numerous sources of inspiration for the project and references to it only being decals that were stolen made the whole thing feel less genuine. When a systemic issue like the plagiarism we have seen appear in numerous Bungie projects over the past few years continues to occur, I feel like it is the failure of a system. This system is ultimately controlled by leadership within the company, and I feel like the failure of Pete Parsons to take accountability for this, or for Joe Ziegler to say absolutely nothing on this during the stream, represents a pattern of leadership at Bungie being ill-equipped to handle the complexities of running their business. The theft of Antireal's artwork is unacceptable, and the fact that the only response we got about this was a small secondary Bungie account tweeting about it, followed by a 4-minute letter from Joseph Cross a day later, is disheartening. I would expect leadership to identify this issue and immediately release on their personal accounts or the primary Marathon account that this is an unacceptable situation, that it's not in line with the team's ethical obligations to the medium. A leader should take full ownership of that failure and state that they are working to resolve it as soon as possible. I do feel that they are doing everything they should be doing at this point, contacting Antireal and properly compensating her for what's occurred, reviewing all the assets to ensure there is no additional stolen works, and implementing a new review process to prevent this from happening again. These are all the appropriate responses that they must do as a company. It's just difficult for an audience to believe Bungie will operate in good faith to do these things, considering this has happened numerous times already. The other side of this is that, unfortunately, the actions of one individual stealing Antireal's work and one team's failure to catch this are now going to impact dozens of people who are genuinely trying their hardest to make an engaging game for players. There are a ton of talented people who work at Bungie, and this failure of a process to detect and eliminate these issues will ultimately result in their lives becoming more stressful, which is unfortunate. I hope that leadership can learn from this experience and that further instances of plagiarism don't occur, but I hesitate to say that I feel confident that this will happen based on their response to this situation. I also want to acknowledge that I disagree with the sentiment that the entirety of the aesthetic of the game was stolen from Antireal. I have seen a lot of people commenting this, and while I agree that stuff was directly pulled from her work and she should be compensated for that, I believe that there were many sources of inspiration for the art direction in totality. I feel like Antireal would probably agree with this sentiment, and I think the larger issue is that a work environment was created where someone not only felt like they either had to do this or that they could get away with it, but also that it was not caught at any point later on in the development process. As someone who cares a lot about the narrative of the new game, it is disheartening especially to see that the Aleph company was not a clever reference to the Aleph 1 team, and in addition to the growing lists of background factions and megacorps that may have some claim to the Lost Colony. The fact that the text within the game is not something that the narrative team had a direct hand in implementing makes it feel like the care that is on display throughout the ARGs may not be carried over to the final project. I hope that this is inaccurate and that a narrative review of the in-game text is just something that comes later in the development process, but I can't shake the feeling that this is something that should have been noticed by the writers before now, or more appropriately, written by the writers of the game. This is an unfortunate situation. The stream was not of the quality you would expect from Bungie. They didn't clearly respond to much of the complaints that people have about the game, opting rather to focus on mechanical changes and details within the experience. The response to the Antireal situation, while I feel like is satisfactory from an actions taken perspective, felt hollow and distorted by technical jargon filtered through lawyers, and the leadership hasn't behaved in a way that is consistent with the kind of qualities I hope to see. Despite this, I still believe that Marathon has the ability to become a good game. The potential to convey a narrative with an incredible depth inside of an intense, PvP-focused extraction game still excites me. The core of what this game is feels good to me, but the complete lack of direct steps being given to handle the situations and issues that have been constantly outlined by fans makes me feel like I am no longer sure that we will see the project that we were all very excited for. I would like to end by saying that engaging with others' ideas and feeling passionately about gaming is why we are all here. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments or in the Discord or wherever else I can read or hear them. But please try to remember when communicating that there are people on the other end of your screen. Try to treat everyone with kindness, even if they may not agree with you, and create the kind of space that would make you feel welcome. The more people who approach communication this way, the better the online space will be for all of us. All right. Bye.